Hi everyone, my name is Alina Grace, and I'm 31 years old. I live in the city of Istvan, a vibrant place known for its mix of historic charm and modern energy. I've spent the last 10 years as the exhibit director at the prestigious Istvan Center for Contemporary Arts. Art is not just my profession, it's the rhythm of my life. Every canvas, every brushstroke speaks to something deeper inside me. On a chilly winter afternoon, as wind rattled the tall windows of the museum, I stood before our latest gallery display, adjusting the final pieces of an exhibit I had poured my heart into for months. My deep emerald scarf flowed gently around my neck, blending with the colors of the abstract collection behind me. As I stepped back and took in the full arrangement, a quiet whisper escaped my lips. Perfect. It was in that moment I felt the alignment of vision and reality, a rare and precious thing in both art and life. I had come a long way. Raised in a modest apartment in Istvan South End, it was my mother, Melanie Grace, who shaped my early love for art. She worked double shifts, teaching during the day at a public school and waiting tables at night. Yet she always found time to sit with me at the kitchen table, sketching, laughing, showing me how creativity could be a sanctuary. We never had much, but we had joy, imagination, and an unshakable bond. That was more than enough. Just as I began reviewing the lighting layout for the Mura exhibit, my colleague Joanna poked her head in through the door to the office gallery. Alina, there's a call waiting for you. It's about the upcoming Dolmen showcase. I nodded, replying, I'll be right there, as I reached for my phone, already buzzing with a message. It was from Julian Hale, my boyfriend of nearly 3 years. Dinner tonight? I made reservations. Can't wait to see you. His text made me smile. I had met Julian at an arts fundraiser for underprivileged students, a man who stood out not just because of his sharp suit and striking presence, but because, amidst all the noise, his eyes were fixed on me, on my words, on the passion in my voice as I spoke about art. He later told me, when you talk about art, Alina, it's like you're casting a spell. That was our beginning. A meeting of minds and hearts, so I thought. Julian Hale worked as a strategic advisor for one of Istvan's top tech investment firms. He was a man who turned heads in every room, yet somehow, he made me feel like I was the only one who existed when we were together. He admired my work, praised my dedication, and listened with genuine interest whenever I rambled on about emerging artists or obscure painting techniques. I loved his ambition and warmth, and I thought we had something rare and solid. But there was one presence that lingered over our relationship like an unwelcome shadow, his mother, Vivian Hale. A widow of wealth and pride, Vivian was the very definition of Istvan high society. With her pristine pearls, sharp cheekbones, and stony poise, she moved through her circles with an air of untouchable authority. The Hale name held weight in the city, and Vivian was determined to protect that legacy, especially when it came to her only son's future. The first time I met her was 6 months into my relationship with Julian. He invited me to a private family dinner at their estate in Northgate, an upscale neighborhood known for its iron-gated driveways and classical mansions. I remember arriving with a carefully chosen dress, simple makeup, and nervous energy buzzing through my chest. Dinner was served on fine porcelain under the gaze of oil-painted ancestors lining the dining room walls. Vivian sat at the head of the table like a queen in her domain, barely touching her meal as she evaluated me with eyes that gave nothing away. So, Alina, she said, her voice smooth and practiced, you're from the South End, I believe? Yes, I answered with a smile, born and raised near Mapleton Street. She nodded slowly, her silver fork glinting under the chandelier. How unique. The South End has quite the character. There was something in her tone, polite, yet dripping with condescension. Yes, it does, I replied, keeping my voice even. It taught me a lot about resilience and creativity. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Well, a lady's grace can bloom in any soil, with the proper pruning. That night, the message was clear. To her, I was an outsider, someone unfit for the world she had carved out for her son. Julian, ever the optimist, dismissed her remarks. She's just old-fashioned, he would say with a chuckle. She'll come around once she gets to know you. But as time passed, it became obvious that Vivian wasn't going to come around. She didn't want to. Vivian's disapproval didn't stay hidden for long. At first, her comments were subtle, questions about my wardrobe, remarks about my humble beginnings, gentle suggestions that I might be more comfortable with simpler things. But with time, those digs grew sharper, and her elegance became a weapon. At a family brunch, she once looked me up and down and said, "That's a lovely dress, dear." It's so refreshing when someone doesn't feel the need to chase trends. I thanked her, pretending not to notice the slight in her words. Another time, as we discussed wedding venues, she tilted her head and asked, "Do you think your side of the family would feel comfortable in a place like the Langford estate? It might be overwhelming." She was always careful, never loud, never vulgar, but her poison came sugar-coated, and I was the only one who could taste the bitterness. Julian stayed supportive, though often naive. "She just needs time," he'd say. "You know how she is, she values tradition and appearances. She doesn't mean anything by it." But she did, and I knew it. The moment I truly saw Vivian's real nature was the night Julian proposed. He knelt on the rooftop of our favorite restaurant, Istwin's skyline glittering behind him. His voice was soft and full of love as he slipped a delicate diamond ring onto my finger. It was everything I had hoped for. That joy, however, was quickly followed by a familiar anxiety. I could already picture the icy smile that would greet this news, the one that said, "This isn't part of the plan." Sure enough, at the formal engagement party a week later, Vivian approached me during a quiet moment by the dessert table. With guests mingling and laughter echoing in the background, she leaned close, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Are you truly ready for this, Alina?" she said. "Becoming a Hale isn't just about wearing a ring. It's about responsibility, refinement, legacy. You were not exactly groomed for this world." Her words landed like stones in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. "I love Julian," I said calmly, "and he loves me. That's the only legacy that matters." She smiled, a tight, polished thing. "We'll see." Later that night, I called my best friend, Camille, someone who had known me since college. After I recounted everything, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You need to protect yourself, Alina," she said. "Record her. Document it all. If she's going to play dirty, don't let her get away with it." I hesitated. It felt underhanded. But after everything Vivian had said, after the look in her eyes when she spoke those words, I knew Camille was right. If the truth had to come out, I wanted to be ready. So I started keeping my phone close, recording whenever I suspected her mask might slip. And Camille, ever clever, helped me plant a few discreet cameras during family gatherings. Vivian, thinking herself untouchable, didn't hold back when Julian wasn't around. "You're just a phase," she once hissed while helping me pick a table layout. "A novelty. Julian will grow out of you. I can't imagine someone like you representing our family at public events. You might play dress up in silk, but it doesn't hide where you come from." I didn't respond. I let the camera capture every word. Because I wasn't just enduring her anymore. I was preparing. As the wedding day drew closer, Vivian's behavior intensified. It was as though she sensed she was running out of time to sabotage the union. She questioned every decision I made, from the guest list to the flowers to the seating arrangements. When I suggested a particular band that Julian and I both loved, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Do they even play anything appropriate?" We wouldn't want to turn the reception into a street performance. Every meeting, every interaction became a test of endurance. My patience, though worn thin, held. I kept recording, kept smiling, kept going. Then came the dress fitting. Vivian had insisted on joining me to lend a hand, though I suspected her true intention was to make sure I didn't choose anything she deemed unworthy of the Hale name. I had selected a beautiful ivory gown, simple, elegant, and adorned with lace from my mother's wedding dress, something that meant the world to me. As I stepped out of the dressing room, Vivian's eyes scanned me head to toe. Her smile was quick and cold. "Well," she said, "it's quaint. Though I suppose it suits your roots." I turned to the consultant to ask about the veil, ignoring her completely. But when I turned back, Vivian was holding part of the train between her fingers. "This lace," she murmured. "Is it vintage or just old?" I stepped forward quickly. "It belonged to my mother." Vivian dropped it like it burned her. "Ah, sentimental. How charming." That night I cried. Not because of what she said, but because I knew this wouldn't stop unless I made it stop. And I knew exactly when I would do it, at the wedding. Camille and I finalized our plan. The laptop, the projector, the timing. Everything was ready. The night before the ceremony, Camille came over with wine and an armful of calm. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "I have to," I said. "Not just for me. For Julian. He needs to see who she really is. And he needs to see me standing tall, not bending." Camille squeezed my hand. "Then let's show them the real Alina Grace." I went to bed with a storm in my heart, but not fear. It was resolve. The morning of the wedding arrived with crisp spring air and soft sunlight pouring into the suite I'd reserved at the Istvan Grand Hotel, just across from the gardens where the ceremony would take place. I stood by the window, sipping tea, watching the early morning stillness slowly fade as the city stirred to life. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and in many ways it was. But I also knew it would be the hardest. Inside the suite, my mother, Melanie, moved with quiet focus, pinning delicate white flowers into my hair. Her hands trembled slightly, and I knew it wasn't because of age. She was trying not to cry. "You look like something out of a painting," she said softly, smiling through glassy eyes. "Your father, he would have been so proud today." I held her hand and nodded. "I know. You did both your parts beautifully." Just then, my younger sister Sophie walked in, barefoot and holding a flute of orange juice. Time check. 1 hour till ceremony. Bride still stunning, weather still perfect, chaos level minimal so far. We all chuckled, but there was tension behind our laughter, a silent understanding between the three of us. Vivian might not let this day go by without trying something. Still, I wasn't afraid. I felt strangely calm, prepared. "You ready?" Sophie asked, handing me the bouquet I had chosen myself, a mix of wild peonies, roses, and forget-me-nots. I took a breath. Let her try. The ceremony itself was dreamlike. The garden chapel, lined with blooming white tulips and arching vines, was a breathtaking vision. When I walked down the aisle on my mother's arm, my father's absence filling the space with silent weight, I saw Julian standing at the altar, his face a blend of joy and wonder. Our eyes met, and he gave me a look I had seen only once before, the night he first told me he loved me. Unwavering, sincere. Vivian sat in the front row in a tailored ice blue gown, her hands folded, her face unreadable. I didn't look at her again. The vows went smoothly. The kiss was everything I had hoped for. And for a while, it felt like nothing could go wrong. Then came the reception. Held in the grand ballroom of the hotel, it was filled with warm laughter, clinking glasses, and the steady rhythm of soft music. Camille floated around with her discreet camera equipment, quietly capturing footage, but her eyes were watchful. She was ready. As guests enjoyed dessert, Vivian stood up, raising her glass for a toast. I felt my shoulders stiffen. "Here it comes." Vivian Hale's voice rang out clear and measured as she raised her crystal glass of espresso martini. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "thank you for joining us on this most meaningful day, the wedding of my son, Julian." Her posture was regal, her tone carefully composed. Around the ballroom, the clinking of cutlery and light chatter faded into silence. She continued, speaking with the calculated grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Watching Julian grow into the man he is today has been the great honor of my life. Brilliant, focused, a leader, a man of heritage." Her eyes swept over the room before pausing on me. "And I must admit," she added, her voice sharpening like a blade, "when I first heard of Alina, I was surprised. A woman from such a different world. One shaped not by legacy, but by struggle. Not by privilege, but by perseverance." I kept my expression neutral, even as the room began to shift with subtle discomfort. She is, Vivian continued, certainly not what one expects when envisioning the future of the Hale family. I saw Julian begin to rise beside me, but I gently placed my hand on his arm, keeping him seated. My other hand stayed ready by my side. I wasn't going to flinch. Vivian raised her coffee cup this time. No more champagne, no more subtlety. But perhaps there is value in contrast. In letting new shades enter the family portrait, she walked slowly across the ballroom toward me. But then again, she said, her voice dropping, now only audible to those near the front, some colors clash too much. Some don't belong at all. Before I could react, Vivian suddenly flung the hot coffee from her cup, right at my face. A collective gasp echoed across the room. The coffee splattered across my cheek, neck, and the front of my ivory dress, the hot liquid soaking through the delicate fabric. My skin stung sharply, not just from the heat, but from the humiliation. The gown, my mother's lace, was ruined, stained brown and dripping in front of 150 horrified guests. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked directly at her. Vivian's satisfied smirk didn't last. Because I turned, slowly, deliberately, to Camille, who had already risen with her laptop. Her eyes met mine, and she gave the smallest of nods. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, stepping forward, the wet fabric clinging to my skin, "thank you for witnessing this special day. But before we continue, I'd like to share something." Vivian blinked. "What do you think you're?" I cut her off. "Let's not waste more coffee or words, shall we?" Camille moved to the tech table. A few taps later, the ballroom screen came to life, and the real Vivian Hale began to play. The ballroom went still as the projector hummed to life, casting a soft glow across the screen at the front of the hall. Vivian froze, her eyes flicking between the guests and the screen. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The first video appeared, a quiet dinner scene from 2 months ago. Vivian sat at the head of her dining table, swirling a glass of wine, her smile cold. She's charming, yes, but charm fades. Julian needs someone who won't embarrass us in front of the board. A soft murmur swept through the guests. The next clip showed her in a bridal shop, speaking in a hushed tone to a consultant. "Please steer her towards something affordable. Something that hides her background." Vivian stepped forward. "These are edited," she snapped, her voice rising. "They're completely out of context." The next video cut her off. Vivian stood with one of her friends at a private art auction. "She's a novelty. He'll grow bored. Mark my words, this marriage won't last." Guests gasped. People whispered. Some turned to look at Vivian, others at Julian, whose face had gone rigid. His hand was clenched tightly around his wine glass. One final clip rolled, recorded just a week before the wedding. Vivian sat on a velvet couch, speaking to someone off-camera. "I'll ruin her on the wedding day. One move, just enough to humiliate her. He'll see the truth." That was when the screen went black. Silence fell so thick you could hear the shallow breathing in the room. Camille closed the laptop gently, letting the moment settle. I looked at Vivian. Her once perfect posture had crumbled into a shaken stance. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Julian stood slowly, walked to my side, and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "I can't believe this," he said softly, his voice trembling. "All this time, all of it." Vivian opened her mouth. "Julian, darling," "That's enough, mother." His voice was no longer trembling. It was cold, firm. "I defended you. I believed in you. But you've crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." Gasps turned to nods. I could see Camille tear up beside the screen. Sophie stood near our table, arms crossed, her jaw tight with anger. Then my mother, my quiet, enduring mother, rose from her chair. My mother, Melanie Grace, stood with a calm that hushed the murmuring room. Dressed in a soft lavender gown and clutching her small handbag with both hands, she walked steadily toward Vivian. Though my mother was shorter and thinner, the moment she stood face to face with her, it was Vivian who looked small. I worked 2 jobs for most of my life, my mother said, her voice clear, trembling only from emotion, not fear. I raised my daughters alone after losing my husband too young. I gave them everything I had, even when I had nothing left for myself. She looked at me, her eyes warm with pride, then turned her gaze back to Vivian with sharp fire behind her calm tone. "And you," she said, "you tried to erase all that with a cup of coffee. You insulted my child, mocked where she came from, and dared to say she isn't worthy, when all I've seen from you is bitterness and cruelty." Vivian took a step back, clearly shaken. Sophie, my sister, stepped up next. "You talk about value, like it comes from a last name," she said. "But it's our love, our decency, and our loyalty that make us rich, things you clearly have no wealth of." I felt tears building in my eyes, but I held them back, not from pain, but from awe. The women who shaped me stood beside me, not ashamed, not broken, but strong. I took a breath and faced Vivian one last time. "You tried to humiliate me tonight, but what you actually did was reveal yourself." Vivian's lips quivered. "You've turned my son against me." "No," I said, my voice firm. "You did that all on your own." Julian stepped forward. "Mother, I think it's time for you to leave." "I am your mother," she said, her voice now desperate, cracking. "And I am your son," Julian replied. "But I'm also a man who won't let the woman he loves be burned and belittled by anyone, not even his own blood." Vivian looked around the room, met with only judgmental stares and cold silence. Slowly, she turned and began walking toward the exit, the soft click of her heels echoing against the ballroom floor. For the first time, she didn't walk with dignity. She walked in defeat. As the heavy ballroom doors closed behind Vivian, the silence held for a heartbeat, and then the room erupted. Applause filled the space, not the polite kind, but the heartfelt, thunderous kind that surged with emotion. I felt the energy of every guest who had witnessed the truth, who had seen the strength it took to stand tall while being publicly shamed, and to rise above it with grace. Julian turned toward me, his eyes filled with remorse and admiration. "I am so sorry, Alina," he said, his voice raw. "I should have protected you better. I should have seen it all sooner." "You couldn't have known," I replied softly. "She wore masks for everyone. I was just the one who lived behind the curtain." Camille came to my side, slipping her arm around my shoulders. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." I smiled weakly. "We did it." At that moment, Margaret Delane, the director of the Istvan Center for Contemporary Arts, and my boss, stepped forward. A woman in her 60s with the kind of grace that didn't need to be flaunted, she addressed the guests, her voice calm and strong. "I've worked with Alina Grace for 8 years," she said, "and I've seen her transform our gallery into something extraordinary, not just with talent, but with character. Tonight, I saw that same strength on full display. Let it be known, this woman is not just the pride of our institution, she is its heart." Her words brought fresh tears to my eyes, and I heard the clinking of glasses as guests lifted their drinks in quiet solidarity. As the music started up again, Julian leaned in close. "Would you dance with me?" I looked down at my ruined dress, the coffee stains still drying across the front. "Even like this?" He gave a small smile. "You could be wearing a trash bag, and you'd still be the most stunning person in the room." I laughed quietly, and we stepped onto the dance floor together. The lights dimmed, the music softened, and for a few brief minutes, it was just us. No whispers, no judgment. Just love. As we danced, I rested my head against his chest and whispered, "Tonight changed everything." Julian nodded, his hand tightening around mine. "Yes. And tomorrow we begin again." After the dancing, the guests slowly began to leave, their faces still reflecting the whirlwind of emotions the evening had delivered. Many came up to offer kind words, firm hugs, or subtle squeezes of my hand. Some looked embarrassed, as if realizing for the first time that they'd bought into Vivian's facade. Others looked inspired, but no one looked away. Camille helped me upstairs to the bridal suite to change. Sophie followed with a makeup bag and a small glass of champagne. Honestly, Sophie said with a sly grin as she unzipped the back of my stained dress. You handled her like a queen. That coffee splash? She thought she was ending you, and you ended her with a laptop. Camille chuckled as she touched up my foundation. Let's just say she didn't know she was walking into a live premiere of Vivian Exposed, the documentary. I smiled as they worked around me. The second dress I slipped into was simpler, smooth silk, a soft neckline, no lace. But it felt just as right. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. When we returned to the ballroom, Julian was waiting at the foot of the stairs. His tie was loosened, his jacket gone, and the look on his face was no longer just of admiration, it was of devotion. You look incredible, he said, holding out his hand. I took it. I feel like I've been hit by a train and crowned queen at the same time. He laughed, then pulled me into a warm embrace. Let's go home soon. It's been enough for one day. Later, as the final guest departed and the ballroom lights dimmed, we walked slowly to our suite. I held my heels in one hand and Julian's hand in the other. There was no more talk of Vivian. No tension. Just the quiet, steady hum of peace settling in. Inside the suite, I placed the antique brooch, once offered to me weeks earlier by Vivian as a show of family legacy, on the bedside table. After tonight, it felt hollow. Pretty, but meaningless. Legacy wasn't handed down in jewels. It was built in choices. Julian lay beside me on the bed, running his fingers gently through my hair. I want to say something, he murmured. Go ahead. I turned a blind eye, he said. I didn't want to believe she could be that cruel. But you never flinched. You stood up to her, and you protected yourself. I promise I'll never let that happen again. I promise to protect you. I looked up at him, my voice soft but certain. We protect each other. That's how this works. He nodded slowly. You're right. And you've shown me how. We lay quietly after that, the sounds of the city far below us, muffled by thick glass and tired hearts. I didn't fall asleep thinking of the stain on my dress or the burn on my skin. I fell asleep thinking of what comes next, because the truth was finally out. And now I was finally free. 1 year passed, and in that time, everything changed, though not all at once, and not without effort. Julian and I moved into a new home in the Midwood Terrace district of Iswin. It wasn't flashy or oversized, but it had tall windows, a little balcony, and a sunroom that I quickly turned into an art nook. We chose it together, deliberately far from Vivian's circle, far from old expectations, and close to who we really were. I sat on that balcony one spring morning, sipping my coffee, watching the city shimmer through a veil of early fog. A small easel stood next to me, holding a canvas in progress. It was for a project close to my heart, the first community arts initiative I had founded under the Istwin Gallery's new public outreach program. A grant Julian helped secure was funding workshops for underprivileged kids, children who reminded me of my younger self. Julian stepped onto the balcony, still in his pajama shirt, holding a folded brochure. You forgot this, he said, handing it to me. It was the poster for our newest exhibition, featuring an artist I had personally mentored. Bright colors, bold lines, fresh ideas. It was everything I wanted this new chapter to be. She's going to make waves, I said proudly. Julian smiled and leaned down to kiss my forehead. Just like you. Our married life was quieter than people expected. No lavish parties, no curated appearances. We went on weekend walks, cooked dinner together, stayed up late watching old films, and discussed everything from poetry to politics. It wasn't perfect. It was real. As Julian poured us both another cup of coffee, he said casually, "By the way, Mom called. She wants to invite us to dinner next week." I paused, cup in hand. At her place. She offered both options. Said she understands if you'd rather meet at a restaurant. I thought for a moment before replying, let's keep it neutral. Restaurant is better for now. Vivian and I had not rebuilt our relationship, not in the traditional sense. But something had shifted. After the wedding, her social status suffered a sharp blow. Several members of her elite circle distanced themselves. Her reputation, so carefully polished over the years, had fractured in a single night. But what surprised me most was what she did afterward. She started seeing a therapist. She admitted, publicly and privately, that she had hurt me, that her obsession with control had cost her the respect of her son and nearly severed their bond entirely. It didn't excuse anything, but it mattered. Over time, she made quiet efforts, not grand apologies, but gestures that showed intention. A few months ago, she invited my mother, Melanie, to lunch. It was awkward, cautious, but it ended in a shared dessert and small laughter. They talked about me, about Julian. And for the first time, Vivian said thank you. I couldn't say I had forgiven her completely, but I could say we were moving forward. Later that afternoon, as sunlight filtered through our living room windows, Julian returned from his office upstairs and sat beside me on the couch. He reached for my hand, fingers curling around mine gently. "You still haven't heard from the doctor?" he asked, watching my face closely. I gave him a soft smile, placing my other hand over my stomach. "I already know." His eyes widened. "You're sure?" I nodded. "Every sign is there. I just wanted to wait until it was official to tell you." For a moment he was silent. Then he let out a breathy, joyful laugh and wrapped his arms around me. "Alina, that's the best news I've ever heard." I held on to him, the weight of the past year melting into something lighter, something beautiful. This wasn't just the next step in our lives. It was a new beginning, one that neither of us would take for granted. A few days later, a package arrived addressed to me in Vivian's refined cursive handwriting. I hesitated as I opened it, not knowing what to expect. Inside was a small, antique wooden cradle, intricately carved and polished with care. Nestled inside was a handwritten note. "If the rumors are true, this cradle is for the new life entering the Hale family. It's a replica of the one Julian once slept in. Please accept it as a symbol, not of what was, but what could be. Vivian." I sat with the cradle in my lap for a long time, brushing my fingers along the smooth wood. I didn't cry, but I did feel something stir deep in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a softening. A few weeks after that, Julian and I accepted her invitation to dinner at a quiet restaurant with simple white tablecloths and dim lighting. Vivian arrived early, dressed simply, no diamonds, no silk. Her posture was still proper, but her tone had changed. She didn't try to control the conversation. She didn't offer commentary on my appearance or try to steer the evening. She just listened. And at the end of the night, when we stood to leave, she handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage brooch, sapphires and diamonds delicately arranged in the shape of a vine. "This belonged to my mother's mother," she said. "Traditionally, it's passed down to the next Hale woman. I should have given it to you when you got engaged. But I wasn't ready." I closed the box gently. "Thank you," I said. "It may take time, Vivian, but I appreciate the effort." She nodded. "I know. I'll wait." That Christmas, when we visited her home, she gave me another small box. Inside was a matching pin, smaller, softer, clearly made for a child. I looked up, and she simply smiled and said, "For the next generation of Hale women." Julian squeezed my hand, and that was the moment we told her. We were expecting twins. A year later, I stood on the balcony of our home in Midwood Terrace, cradling a cup of warm tea in one hand and watching the skyline of Istwin stretch into the distance. The city buzzed below, but up here, there was peace. Inside, the sound of soft coos and tiny feet pattering across the living room rug made my heart swell. Our twin daughters, Liana and Esme, had just turned 6 months old. They were bundles of curiosity, giggles, and chaos. Every day with them felt like a masterpiece being painted in real time. Unexpected, messy, beautiful. Julian walked out with one of the babies nestled in his arm and kissed the top of my head. "She fell asleep on my shoulder again," he said softly. "She's smart," I said, grinning. "She knows her dad's the coziest pillow in the house." We sat together for a while, just watching the morning grow. This life we had now, it was ours. Not shaped by legacy, not ruled by judgment, and no longer shadowed by anyone else's expectations. My professional life had evolved too. I now led a mentorship program at the Istvan Gallery for young artists from underrepresented backgrounds. We hosted exhibits in schools, partnered with libraries, and created spaces where kids could believe that art was for them, not just something hung in glass buildings, but something that lived in their hands. Vivian had become a quiet part of our world. She visited the girls often, never overstepping, always bringing books or small gifts she'd picked out with genuine thought. She was still a woman of habit, but therapy had softened her edges. Her love, though late, had begun to take shape in actions rather than expectations. One evening, as I tucked Liana into her crib, an antique replica of Julian's, gifted by Vivian, I caught my reflection in the nursery mirror. My eyes were tired, my hair slightly frizzy from the day, but I smiled, because I knew who I was. Not just Alina Grace, exhibit director. Not just Julian's wife. Not just the girl who once stood in a ballroom covered in hot coffee, but a woman who reclaimed her worth, who chose dignity over drama, who built a new legacy from the ground up. As I stood there, watching my daughters breathe softly in their cribs, I whispered a quiet promise into the room. You'll grow up knowing what love looks like. Real love. Not the kind that judges you, but the kind that sees you, stands by you, and lets you shine. And I meant every word.